Yep.
All right, cool. Let's officially begin. Hi, everybody. My name is John. I'm with the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. This is our weekly live stream where we talk to various people throughout the gaming industry. And today we're very, very fortunate to have Jason Graves, composer, music extraordinaire. How's it going, Jason?
It's going great, John. How are you doing?
Very good. In case someone doesn't know who you are, could you give us a little bit of background as to what you do, a little bit of your, I guess, bibliography?
Well, I'm a 42-year-old male. I enjoy walks on the beach and long. No, that's not what you mean.
A little detailed there.
Okay, too much TMI then. Fair enough. So I'm a composer. I do work in film, TV, video games, advertising, trailers, a little bit of everything. But honestly, I've kind of found my niche, so to speak,
Hmm.
in video games. So I've been doing video games for the last 15 or 17 years.
Hmm.
A lot of franchise stuff like Dead Space and Tomb Raider. A lot of scary games, but also before the scary games, I did World War II games, things for Ubisoft, and even fun kind of Star Wars games and stuff like that.
Very cool.
And I believe today we're talking about the more recent Ubisoft game, Far Cry Primal. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we're playing Far Cry Primal right now in the background, and
Excellent.
I guess just in general, then, what kind of attracted you towards video games? What brought you into the realm of making music there?
Unlike nowadays, where it seems like a lot of kids, because that's what I was at the time,
Mm.
kids are in school and they're playing games and they think, I want to write music for games, which I think is fantastic. Back in the day, a lot of my counterparts are the same way. We kind of stumbled into games on accident almost. That's what happened to me. I was working in Los Angeles for a couple of years doing film trailers and some ghostwriting for movies, lots of TV spots and television shows,
Mhm.
and I stumbled across my first video game, which was actually a video game adaptation of the film King Arthur, which I believe came out in 2003,
Mm.
and they needed a score. And it was just one of those cases where I knew someone that knew someone else literally in Australia where the game was getting made,
Mm.
and they were pretty much finished with the game, and holy cow, we should put some music behind this.
Mm.
And I was able to give them the music, and it was just such a creatively freeing process doing I think maybe 45 minutes of music in about a month,
Yeah.
where normally I would spend about 45 seconds of music, for like 6 or 8 weeks just doing the same thing over and over and over. It can get a little creatively frustrating at times. So
Mm.
games allow me to be expressive and creative and kind of scratch that itch that I just wasn't really getting at the time in film or television.
Yeah, it's going more onto that. I'm just curious more about the differences between scoring a game versus scoring an advertisement or a movie. You talked a little bit about freedom and I guess longer songs and longer music. What other differences are there?
Well, there's a lot of music. That's one thing for sure.
Yeah.
The games have the gameplay alone. My page just loaded.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry about that. So with the game, I mean, even a small game, you'll have 8 or 10 hours, 12 hours of gameplay,
Mm.
and that needs music. Now you're not doing 10 or 12 hours of music, but it does need, I mean, a decent amount. Like hopefully a third of it is being scored, but even if it's just a third, you're talking about 3 or 4 hours of music, and even something that's practically wall-to-wall music, like Star Wars, for example,
Mhm.
is 100 minutes maybe in a film, and now we're talking about 4 hours of music. So there's a lot of material that needs to be written,
Mm.
which is great because it's more material to work through and work on themes and motifs and do things that I would normally do in a film score.
Mm.
But I have 4 hours to spend working on it. So if certain motifs for the animals or for the different tribes, I had a lot of time to explore all of that. And if it were a film, it's then and then it's gone.
Yeah. Uh, Going now to Far Cry Primal, I'm curious to hear a little bit about your adventures in scoring and a little bit about that journey of how you came up with the music, some differences maybe to your other works that you've done.
Differences is actually a great word because that as a composer, as an artist, I think, you know, you can be an environmental artist, or you can be an architect, or you can be a painter, but creative people who normally don't want to be pigeonholed and asked to repeat themselves. Otherwise, it gets a little frustrating.
Yeah.
And I try really hard, and this is the other big thing that I really love about games. From project to project, my inner goal is to do something different that's going to be creatively satisfying to me as a composer, but then the outward goal that I try to represent to everybody else is doing what's going to be appropriate for the game. And when those two things align, that's when it works really well. And that's, I mean, it just always happens with games. So with Far Cry, the first thing I did, like I do on any game, is watch it, get as much information as I can, and I'm thinking in terms of sound. You know, what sounds can I use that will make me happy because they're different, but at the same time really satisfy the needs of the game because it's different, but it's purpose-built for the project. And the ideas were a lot more straightforward for this game. The execution was probably the most difficult of any game I'd worked on because I'm looking at the same kind of stuff. It was just in a more rudimentary form, and you see rock and stone and dirt and, you know, kind of leather straps and bones, and it's a lot of visceral, real-world sort of materials. And I thought it would be really neat if the music could literally be made of sounds based in that same world. So a lot of it was just gathering materials like that. I mean, literally anything. It's like, hey, look, there's rocks around the fireplace. I'm going to get some rocks. Or some of the tribes will have plates of armor that are made out of bamboo. I'll get some bamboo and I'll you know, scratch it and play on it like a drummer would, except it's a bamboo drum set instead of a regular drum set. That was really the basis of the entire score. It was just a matter of breaking it up into 3 different sections for the 3 tribes in the game.
That's cool.
And making it sound different so that when, even if you're just walking through the woods, you can hear something. And this is everyone's ideal situation. We wanted people to know our game within hearing 3 seconds of music, which is, I mean, unless you're going dun 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 dun, you know, you're doing like a really memorable theme, it can be a little tricky. So a lot of times with games, since we don't want to have themes in your face all the time, it comes down to textures. And that's where this fell right in. It's like, well, if I do some like rubbing this rock and dirt and things, you're going to know immediately kind of which tribe you're in, which section of the people's sort of property lines you've crossed, if you're in enemy territory, if you're in your own territory. And then it was just running with it.
I'm just curious. That kind of sounds like it's going towards sound design as well. Did you have a big merriment towards sound design and music? Is that what happened?
Yes, very much. When I was up in Montreal with Ubisoft, it was the whole audio team. And this is another thing that's really great about games, is there's a lot of teamwork and a lot of camaraderie. So I'm not just talking to one guy that's going to be putting the music in the game. I'm meeting with a team of 5 or 6 people, and most of them probably have nothing to do technically with the music, but they realize, just like I do, that the more we know each other and the more we understand what we're doing and the more we can hear what we're each contributing to the game, the better it's going to end up working together. It's a symbiosis of like equal-minded people trying to make something that's a lot better than what they would be doing by themselves. And for this one, I even used sound effects, animal sound effects especially, in the score for like transitions and things like that. So when you listen to the score by itself, it's effective, but in the game, it's really cool because you hear this kind of roaring sound and sort of like, is that in the score? Or is that an animal behind me? Or we like that sort of psychological gameplay.
That's cool. Speaking of instruments and stuff, if I'm not mistaken, is your favorite instrument the drums? Is that correct?
My favorite instrument. Well, I'm a drummer. I was a drummer. I played drums first. And it wasn't necessarily because I loved playing drums at the time, but my dad played drums, and I was in middle school, and all the drummers were graduating. So the teacher had a special class. Who wants to be a millionaire? Who wants to be a drummer? And a bunch of kids put up their hands. And I fell in love with it. My favorite instrument, though, probably are not the ones that I play, because just you feel self-conscious about it. I really love. I mean, if I had to pick one, it would probably be the cello, just because I love the range, and you can be percussive with it, and you can be really scary, but you can also be just beautiful and elegant. No cellos in Far Cry. Lots of dirt though. My favorite instrument of all time though is definitely dirt. Yeah.
I'm curious, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like throwing dirt on like against drums, or like throwing?
Well, for Far Cry, it was literally just a big bucket of dirt.
Yeah.
And I had everything, no metal anywhere, so it was a big plastic bucket.
Yeah.
Wasn't recording the bucket though, with the dirt in it, and then I had a stick that I jabbed into the dirt very violently, or kind of stirred in a rhythmic motion. So instead of like a tapping, you get a kind of swishy dirt sound.
So interesting. I mean, you were creating your own instruments in some senses.
Yes.
Seems like,
yeah. It was. I mean, for the Udam, which are sort of the big kind of gorilla-looking prehistoric man version of the enemy tribes, it was all. I mean, you can't even really call them instruments, because I was literally just taking two big sticks and banging them on another stick. Or I had a lot of little bamboo pieces that I cut and strung together and stirred them, and it made this really rattly. Someone had a necklace in the game that looked like that, and they had bone, I think. And I did try bone and horns and antlers, but it was more like this really pitiful, tiny little sound. So I used bamboo, and it had a great rattle to it. So I built instruments a little bit, but for the most part, it was kind of like found sounds. Lots of rubbing of rocks, and before I was smart, blisters and splinters in my hands. And then I wised up and bought some gloves to put on.
Very nice. Another question going forward is a little bit about your favorite genres. It seems like, looking at your discoverography, you work on a lot of horror games, as well as games like Far Cry as well. Is there a favorite genre you work with? Is there something you like to be in within video games? Or is that just because of just the nature of the work and the projects you get?
Yeah, it's definitely something. It's almost like my favorite genre is the one that I wasn't working on in the previous project. Because I know my favorite genre used to be kind of fantasy orchestral stuff, because I didn't get a chance to do a lot of it, and I haven't done a lot, but I got to do some Ubisoft things with the Might and Magic series, and it sort of scratched that itch, and then I moved on to other things. But I haven't done anything truly orchestral in probably the last 2 years, so now I'm sort of thinking, well, it'd be nice to get back to the live orchestra and do something with them. And that's the creative curse. You're constantly, running from like one room to the other, like, I want to be in here. No, now I want to be over here. But I wouldn't have it any other way, honestly.
Awesome. We also have some fan questions coming in, so I'm just going to lay some of them down while we're talking, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
One of them is about how you write music. Do you write music specifically for the games only, or is there potential to release it down the road, and who makes that decision? So I guess maybe this question is more about the music you make in general, and do you make music just for yourself, or do you make it just for games, things like that?
I've always had an assignment. I've always had clients. My wife, years ago, when she would first meet someone maybe as a new friend and they found out that I was a composer, they'd say, "Oh, your husband's a composer. I bet he wrote the prettiest songs for you when you were dating, or I bet he's written some really great lullabies for your kids or something." And she just says, no, we couldn't afford to hire him and give him deadlines, because she knows I've just kind of always written that way ever since I was out of school. So it's very, very project specific. And I write a lot more than I'm really required to do. Even for Far Cry, when I was first speaking with Ubi, they just wanted to know if I had, have you got any examples? Do you have any ideas? And they were literally expecting me to send, maybe a 60-second example of, what I thought the game might sound like. And I did something like 12 minutes of music.
Wow.
Just it was like, okay, well, that's a good example of that, but maybe what if I try this? And it's just a lot of fun, especially in a studio like this where everything sounds so good.
Yeah.
I mean, give me an excuse to mess around and play with things some more. And give me another reason to do super, super specific kinds of sounds. I love limiting myself, and that's all driven by the game or the film, whatever project I'm working on. It just makes it more exciting for me.
Very cool. Another question coming from the stream is, Heaven would like to know some of your favorite video game soundtracks, including your own, and what you think about Baba Yetu.
Oh yeah, love Baba Yeto, especially everything that Christopher's Tune did for Academy Award recognition and everything. That was a big deal for video game music. And then of course Austin Wintory followed suit with a nomination for Journey. So that's something that's always nice to have in terms of recognition outside of really what we as composers care about, which is the team recognition, and then of course the fan recognition. When it goes beyond that, it's really just icing on the cake. My favorite game soundtracks, it's funny, I don't even necessarily think about it in terms of game soundtracks as much as I think about it in terms of friends that I have, because this is just, I've been doing it for so long now. So I think of something like Everyone's Gone to the Rapture, which is Jessica Curry. I love that soundtrack. And Austin's Journey is really, really great. Gary Scheiben, another friend that I've had for a long time, the BioShock Infinite score I thought was just amazing. Those are, and I also love Hohokum has a great score, and it's actually put together by artists. It's all on a particular label, and the team I worked with on a couple of games at Sony were working on Hohokum at the same time and telling me how they were putting it together, and it was really fascinating because some of the music was composed, but a lot of it was pre-done already, and they got some masters and were able to make it interactive, and they actually won awards for best interactive score, which I thought was really cool. Yeah.
It's a small community, right? It seems like
it really is.
Yeah. Everyone knows each other. I mean, when I always talk to Austin or Gary, they always mention and name drop this tight-knit group of musicians.
It's something that, because of the conventions, and especially once you've been around for 5 or 7 years, and there's some games that garner a little bit of recognition. There's big conventions in the States, but there's also smaller ones that happen overseas, and that's actually where we get to know each other a lot, because it'll be like Lauren Balfe and I in Spain for 4 days, and it's just us with a bunch of other people, and we're all hanging out doing something. Or Chris Valesco and I in Germany, and you get to spend a lot of quality time with these guys, and we're basically all clones of each other. We all sit in these dark rooms by ourselves all day writing music, so it's nice to be able to kind of establish relationships face to face, and they really do mean a lot because it's a really lonely job.
What do you mean by that? Do you just mean in terms of the way you write music on your own? And
this is. I mean, you have to. It has to be quiet. You have to be by yourself, and it's a lot of internal conflict, pretty much all day long. Convinced, like this is this going to work? I don't know. You're always worried about making the best sounds you can, but you have a deadline at the end of the day. And there's not a lot of people that, I can explain it to my wife, and she's amazing. But talking with another composer, just joking about deadlines, joking about, inner turmoil and things, they're right there with you doing the same thing you are. And that's that kind of camaraderie, like brothers in arms sort of thing.
That's absolutely fascinating. Another question coming in from the stream. The Dead Space games have some of the best atmospheres in gaming. Could you ask, or I guess I'm asking, what inspirations you use while composing the games?
Could you ask? You say, no, I can't. Sorry. Dead Space was really cool because originally, little known fact, the music was more like sci-fi action. So something that maybe Tom Cruise or Will Smith would star in, like for a film. We did maybe 20 minutes of that, and that was per EA's request. That's what they wanted, and it had a little bit of scary tension to it, but not much. And then they came back after 3 months or so of just testing a little tiny piece, and the audio director told me, okay, we're literally throwing all that out, and it's all being thrown out, and we just want you to write the scariest music that anyone has ever heard. And he didn't say, you know, heavy metal or crazy sound design or make it all orchestral or anything like that. He left it all up to me. So I love the idea, looking at the game, just like we talked about before, those necromorphs were like some of the freakiest things I had ever seen. And then the fact that they were humans that were turned by this infestation going on. I love the idea of taking an orchestra, completely normal, just standard, 60 or 70 piece orchestra. If you're at a concert, regular people, regular instruments, no big speakers, no computers involved, and the conductor puts up his hand, and when the baton comes down, you hear this ungodly, unnatural, completely unrecognizable sound, because the orchestra has been infected and turned into like an orchestral necromorph.
Yeah.
And it just came down to them doing all the wrong things with their instruments. So the inspiration was really trying to be scary and doing sounds that people couldn't recognize. Because when they don't recognize the sound, your brain's trying to figure out what it is. And the genius about that is it like delves into your psyche unknowingly.
Yeah.
Like, let's say they're all doing pizzicato strings, like crazy. Well, one person's going to think that it sounds like spiders running around their arms, right? Because they don't even realize it, but they have this knee-jerk reaction, and it makes them think of spiders, and that freaks them out. Another person thinks of rats because they're scared of rats. Someone else thinks that it sounds like, little snakes falling down the back of their neck or something. And everyone has a different internal reaction, right? Because and they're all experiencing it on their own, and their brain's trying to figure out what the sound is. So it just became basically sound design and figuring out the best way to capture it with all the musicians and have them not laugh, because they laughed all the time because they were doing all these crazy things with their instruments. They're like, we're getting paid for this? It was a lot of fun, and it was also I learned so much. But it came down to the unknown. How do I replicate the unknown via musical instruments?
Very cool. Another question coming in from William is about work-life balance, kind of going back to your personal life. How do you set hours for work? Do you just go on with it and realize it's 3 a.m. while you're working? What do you do?
Well, when I was 25, that probably happened occasionally. When I first started, especially, I definitely had all-nighters that I had to pull. But I didn't have any kids then either. And I just had a chat stream with Austin and Lenny Moore, two amazing composers. And Lenny's got responsibilities and a wife and everything, and I do as well. Austin has a wife, but, no kids. He's got cats. It's not the same. Cats are not the same as kids. So we were joking. Austin's work schedule is just kind of like what he feels like. Well, I might get up and go in at 3 a.m., and then maybe I'll end up going home at 2, or, crazy, crazy hours, if he feels motivated to work those hours.
Yeah.
And I'm the opposite, mostly because, well, I'm older than Austin, so I can't pull it the way he does. Plus, I've got a family, so probably 10 years ago, I just kind of started working more or less like 9 to 5. And I had the benefit of working for 10 years before that, so I knew that if I focused on quality work and not how long I worked, that then we go back to the lonely part. I mean, I need to be in a room with absolute silence and no one's bothering me, and I'm not checking emails. I'm working. So I've got my 3 or 4 minutes of music composed that day, and at 5, I'm posting it to the FTP, and I go inside and take a break, and my brain starts figuring out what I'm doing the next day. And it's all about kind of already having it finished almost in my head and just spending the day inputting it into the computer. And I used to pick around a lot and figure out how to make it work, and it obviously takes longer. But just like anything else, you do something for 40, 50, 60 hours a week for 10 years, it just starts, you get faster at it, basically.
Cool. Let's see. Another question coming in is also about your inspirations in general. You talked a little about your love for fantasy music. Do you have any composers that you love to be inspired by, or mediums, or movies, products, etc.?
Well, I love movies.
Hmm.
I love pretty much any movie. I do have a soft spot for if we're talking about movies, sort of the sci-fi things, and it's mostly because of the music more than anything else. For film, Williams and Goldsmith are sort of at the top of the pecking order
Mm.
for me. But listening to them, it's hard to not consider the classical composers, especially like ballets and things, because I still love Tchaikovsky and his ballets, and Stravinsky and his ballets, because they're very film music oriented. You know, they're telling a story,
Mm.
and I listened to some ballets before I really started listening to film music. And that's all orchestral. That's kind of where my heart lies, is with the orchestral music. But being a drummer first and playing in bands and doing guitar and bass and keyboards and things like that, I also love sort of the other end of the spectrum. And if there's something, more techno-oriented, or Trent Reznor scores and things like that with the sound design sort of things are also really interesting. So, I mean, Williams for film, and Bernard Herrmann too, though it's hard. Herrmann had such a specific style. You know, it seems nowadays it's pretty much impossible to have a style. The composers are either just asked to write something very non-specific, or they're chameleons, which is great. Like James Newton Howard, I love his stuff, but I wouldn't really be able to identify like a James Newton Howard style, quote unquote, the way you could Bernard Herrmann, James Horner, even Jerry Goldsmith, and especially Williams. He obviously has a very classical sensibility, and that's sort of a big part of his style, the harmonic language and the way he uses it. Yeah, I think that mostly answered the question,
No,
didn't it?
definitely. It's a wide variety. It's a very wide breadth of composers, which is awesome to hear. Another question coming in. What was the most difficult soundtrack that you worked on?
You know, whatever the one is I'm working on right now, it always seems like that's a good question, because everyone seems hard at the beginning, because there's so many unknowns, and I always feel like, and it's easy to say this at the end of the project, but if I haven't tried something different enough, if I'm not pushing myself enough during the project, that I'm basically kind of 50% excited and 50% terrified, then I don't feel like I've done enough to try new things. I don't ever want to sit back and, well, I did that for this game, and now I'll just do those two things, and that'll work for this project. So going in, Dead Space was probably the scariest, and I don't know if that would be the most difficult. To me, that is the most difficult, like the most creatively challenging, because the way Dead Space was made, there's no live orchestra that's being played in real time on the cues. The orchestra that I recorded was all phrases and effects and things, and I literally built the soundtrack via MIDI and after the fact, with instruments that I custom made. So there was a lot of first times for me. First time sampling an orchestra, first time building instruments in, what software do I use, first time trying to figure out how to make my own custom instruments work, and only using those sounds. It was a lot of unknowns, and I was also doing all the music, trying to figure out how to maximize the recording time, and it was terrifying, which I guess is appropriate, right? Because the music, the music's terrifying too.
Yeah.
But again, it was nice. Like I said, the musicians were fantastic. I had help with Paul Taylor, who's my orchestrator and copyist. We had lots of talks about the best ways to record aleatoric stuff, which actually was a question that I got on Facebook, which I will go ahead and address.
Yeah, go for it.
Asking about, were the aleatoric, which means just kind of chance music, so just blurs of sounds and notes, were they written as gestures? Were they written down musically speaking? Did I wave my hands and say this is loud and this is quiet. Follow my, because I've seen guys do that a lot of times. At the end of a session, they'll just say, "Okay, everybody," and they'll get the whole orchestra. This is your lowest note, this is your highest note, this is loud, and this is quiet, and then they just take the baton and kind of move around, and the orchestra's just playing whatever they want. That's aleatoric because the player has a choice.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that for 2 days. I mean, I had 2 days of recording with this orchestra. So the way it was all written out was as boring as possible. So that when the musician looked at the piece of paper, it just said, there was maybe a group of 5 notes and it just said as fast as possible with a dynamic underneath it. And it had that for 20 bars. And then there'd be a 4-bar rest. And then it had to have the same thing as fast as possible, different dynamic maybe, parentheses, same notes as before, or something like that. There were no questions because that aleatoric stuff can get. Now, how do I want? There's all these questions that could come up, and if I have 50 minutes in an hour to record, I could spend 15 of those just trying to explain what I want them to do. And we didn't have time for that. So what was great is Paul Taylor worked on making it as simple and precise as possible. And every cue, I mean, just go 4 clicks, we're at 120, and go. And everybody knew what to do. And they all had their rests, and it'd be maybe a 5-minute cue with breaks between each section, but we recorded it just like it were music. They were just, playing, all these crazy sounds.
It sounds pretty crazy right there.
Yeah.
Indeed. Another question coming in too is about your drumming. Starting as a drummer, did you find it initially difficult to write for the orchestra? Anything there in terms of challenges?
Yeah. Just overwhelming, I think, was probably the best word, because I started studying it in earnest not until I was out of undergraduate school. And, I mean, there were things that I just didn't. I mean, I didn't know the contrabasses in the strings sounded an octave lower than written. I didn't know the best way to do anything. So a lot of it was, I think, I felt so insecure about anything I could do with the orchestra and being a drummer with harmony, because even in school, my composition friends were sax players or piano players, and they understood harmony in ways that, when you're playing drum set or something, you don't necessarily have to understand to fulfill your rhythmic duties. So I felt like I was behind in harmony, I was behind in chord progressions, I was behind in orchestration, and I just jumped in head first and spent about 7 or 8 years at night in bed reading scores and giggling to myself and marking things up, with my wife kind of rolling her eyes like, you should read a book every now and then. I'm like, this is better than a book. Studying scores, especially classical scores, Dover scores. And it just sort of, I kind of pieced together after seeing things so many different times, like, well, I've seen them do this before, so that must work, the way you interlock the horns a certain way or something. It was definitely a lot to bite off, but I started as simple as possible and with strings, and then kind of worked my way up from there. And it just sort of took over. I by no means know everything that I wish I knew, but there were other things I needed to learn then, like, I need to learn how to program samples, and then I need to learn how to mix these things in the computer, and other things started grabbing my attention. So now it's just become kind of part of my psyche, and I do things without really thinking about them because I know they're going to sound a certain way, and it's like feathers in your cap. Little tricks that you learn.
Very cool. Curious then, you've been working with music for quite a while now. What's changed the most for you, whether it's in games or just in composing in general? Have you seen and observed any changes in your career so far?
I think, technologically speaking, it's amazing. I mean, the 3 different projects I'm working on right now, the abilities that we have in terms of playing the music back in the game. I mean, when I first started, I was literally doing, it was 2 sine waves and a white noise generator.
Wow.
And I was doing a Star Wars game Only 3 or 4 songs with Clint Bajakian back at the time when I think his company was called maybe Bay Area Sound. It was like Apprentice of the Force or something. It was a DS game maybe, or it was a long time ago. But I'm transcribing like the battle from the first Star Wars, which is all these crazy like discongruent lines and weird harmonies and rhythms, and I've got 2 sine waves in a white noise generator. But even after that, with stereo CD sound, you have stereo sound and you have a stinger that'll play and cut the previous stereo track off. There wasn't a lot of flexibility. With the first Dead Space, which came out 8 years ago, we had 4 streams of audio that could play and a stinger that could play on top of it. And that really blew my mind because it was really interactive. Yeah. But even then, I remember asking EA, well, can we have some reverb, that plays, or like a little bit of a delay, and they just laughed. It was just a custom engine that they had built, and they were pushing the limits of the box, like as it was anyway. Well, fast forward 8 years, and now I'm doing the implementation in Wise for one of these games. We're doing it here at the studio. I can have 12 streams of music. Wow. Any of those streams can have reverb, distortion, delays, filter passing, like high or low filters, panning automation, all independent of each other and all based on literally anything that the game is doing. Wow. I mean, how many people are around you, how many bullets are in the air. You have unlimited control. I mean, enough rope to hang yourself. And just like computers and sounds in the computer with composers, there's an unlimited number of sounds, there's an unlimited number of loops, unlimited software that you can always want to buy, and the key is focusing in on specific things based on what you need and letting everything else go. And this is speaking from today, working with Wise, figuring out, well, we could do 10,000 things. What do we need to do for this piece of music that we're talking about right now? Okay, that means we have 3 things to choose from. That's the biggest difference, the way the music is implemented, for sure. And it's great because, I mean, it truly is an interactive score that I can have a 4-minute piece of music that you could play for 20 minutes, and it never repeats. It's constantly evolving and moving because we have those controls over all those independent tracks.
That's crazy. You were talking about 3 different projects. Could you talk about any of them, or could you talk about anything you're working on coming up?
Of course not.
I know.
That's why, I mean, even just saying 3 different projects, it's like, am I going to get like a tranquilizer dart in the neck? No, it's all sworn to top secrecy, of course, but they are very cool, and just kind of keep, these game guys, they want different things and interesting things and original things. And it's great. It's great working in games, for sure.
Yeah. Is there a dream project you'd love to work on if you had a chance, or something you want to really create in your head?
Well, that question gets asked a lot, and I understand why. And my answer has been the same for like the last 10 years, I think. I just want to work with Naughty Dog. That's it. I just... Pretty much, like any answer, it's always this. Just Naughty Dog. I think the way that they make games and the storytelling behind them, and I think maybe it appeals to the movie, the cinephile in me. I love the arcs and the characters and the lighting and everything. I keep hoping if I keep talking about it and stuff like this, that someone at Naughty Dog will hear and go, oh, maybe we should talk to Jason. Yeah, I think they're the bee's knees.
No, that's awesome, and we'll definitely have to tweet at them with this interview.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. You never know. You never know. Alrighty, so I think we're heading down to the last few questions here. One of our interns has bolded this question for me and wants me to really ask this because he thinks you'll enjoy it. Hopefully you will. Maybe you won't. With your background as a drummer, we know how much you guys love your drummer jokes. Can you try to answer as many of these as possible?
Yeah, I've done research lately, so hit me. I'm ready.
All right, here we go. How many drummers does it take to change a light bulb?
I don't remember the specific number, but it's like 10, maybe. 9. No, wait. Oh, what is it? 1. So 1 to change the light bulb. No, 10. 1 to change the light bulb, and 9 to talk about how Neil Peart would have done it better.
The answer to this thing is saying none, because there's a machine that does that now.
Oh, well, that's even better. Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
What do you call a drummer with half a brain?
Drummer with half a brain. I don't know. What?
Overqualified.
That's good.
3 more. How do you get a drummer off your porch?
Pay him for the pizza.
Indeed,
Boom.
yes.
You see what I did there, right?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Why are drummers always losing their watches?
Because they can... Wait, why are they always losing their watches? I was going to say they can never find the time, but that might not work. Tell me.
You're on the right track. Everyone knows they have trouble keeping time.
Yeah, there you go.
And finally, why are band breaks limited to only 20 minutes?
These are great. I haven't heard some of these. It's got to be good. Tell me.
So you don't have to retrain the drummer.
Okay, I've got a couple other good ones. One of my favorites. These. All right, 2. I got 2.
Okay.
And the first one could be composer as well, but we'll stick with drummers. What's the difference between a drummer and a large pizza?
I have no idea.
A large pizza can feed a family of 4.
Oh my god.
All right, here's the last one. These are both very. I think a lot of me being a drummer, a lot of us are like, ooh, that hits a little too close to home. But this one's the same way. What's the difference between a drummer and a savings bond?
A drummer and a savings bond. Go for it. Tell me.
Over time, a savings bond will mature and make money.
Oh, that's cold. That's just cold. I'm assuming you flow these questions out on your Twitter quite often, or your social media. Is that correct?
I did. We were going to do a stream with Emily Reese, who's amazing. She does a lot of great stuff to support game composers, and I started asking for drummer jokes, and I got flooded. It was great.
Very cool. Final question from the stream. One question again from Fisty Mart. How do you keep the creativity flowing? Are there any tips for overcoming, creative block, writer's block, whatnot?
Oh yeah, writer's block. If being on a schedule makes it really easy to not get writer's block because you don't have any choice, because you just have to have. You're terrified of not being finished, so you have to finish it. If you weren't on a schedule, I can understand how that would get frustrating sometimes. What I love to do is, if I'm just looking for some extra inspiration, a lot of times I'll take a break first and kind of hopefully forget a little bit about what I was working on. Go do something else, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And then when I come back, I do not listen to what I was working on. I spend another 10 or 15 minutes listening to other things, completely different. I mean, some orchestral stuff or some... ambient music or some rock or, anything, just to kind of cleanse the palate. And then I go back, and almost every time, first it's a little depressing because it's like, oh yeah, I remember what this sounds like. I don't like it. But then I start hearing other things in my head. And that's writer's block, right? You're listening and you can't figure out what else to do. You can't hear where you want to go in your head and be able to put it in the computer. And to me, if you just start with a clean slate, and, you're maybe 30 minutes away, but it's not just doing other things. Some people like to go do something completely different. I like to wipe the slate and then listen to some other music to kind of get the neurons firing again.
Very cool. Final question, pretty much final question is, what advice would you give to someone that wants to get into composing?
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, keep going.
No. I mean, basically, anyone new, what would you suggest, especially for a video game composition?
And that's a sticky question, because I'm a very firm believer that there's no such thing as a video game composer. Just like there's no such thing as a film composer. I mean, they might be a composer that mostly works in film, but I think there's a big difference between a composer who mostly works in games, which would be me, versus a video game composer. Because if you're thinking of, automatically restricting yourself to this one genre, I mean, if you want to be a composer, you're already like basically saying, I want to be an NBA player or an NBA star. I want to be a movie star. I want to be like Steven Spielberg. You're setting up like really high goals that take a lot of work. And one of the things that I've learned over the years, even before I got into games, I mean, I did everything from voiceovers for political spots. For 2 years, I recorded bands. I didn't do anything for my own music. It was like dropping in other people's music and mixing things and recording bands and stuff like that. But I found out once I got back into composing that everything I had done, as much as I didn't enjoy it, actually helped me once I started writing again, because now I knew a little bit about microphone technique and I knew a little bit about dealing with people in the studio, and I felt comfortable around them and positioning the mic certain ways. And that sort of experience doesn't come if you have a very narrow focus. That wasn't the question, I know. But if you have a very narrow focus and say, like, I want to be a games composer, because then you're also limiting your happiness to where, like, maybe I want to work in the audio industry somehow, and my end goal would be to be a games composer.
I think that's great advice.
And I got one more little piece of advice too.
Yeah, I got it.
Cut me off when, but that's the first one. So broaden your horizons, and there's nothing that you can learn about audio in general, sound effects, broadcast processing, all that stuff that will not help you. Anything you learn is going to help you be a better composer. Now, in terms of like starting out and writing and all that, I can only speak from personal experience, but I could never imagine doing anything else, and my parents never told me I had to get a real job. So I was always obsessed with writing music. Even before I had a computer, I was writing stuff on the piano. So I would say write music every day, even if it means you only have 20 minutes because you've got school or you've got work. Dedicate some time to write something. Work on the piece every day that you're working on, and give yourself a deadline to finish it, not to stop, because there's a big difference. Give yourself a deadline to finish it. Maybe you're super busy and you say, I want to write one piece a month that's 2 or 3 minutes long. And when you get to that deadline, you finish it, and that means that you're not going to work on it anymore, and you've wrapped it up as best you can, because that's going to give you a little bit of preparation to working with other people and having deadlines. And the more you do it, it's just like muscles and practicing piano or your instrument. The more you do it, the better you get. The faster you get, you're building up those muscles like you're training for an Olympic event, and you can't just step up onto the racing thing and be up against these folks that have been training for years, and you're like, I stretched a little bit. I'll be good. You gotta build it up, and if you love doing it, then it's a no-brainer because you're having fun. It's basically an excuse to go play.
Very, very cool. Well, Jason, if anyone wants to find you online, where is the best place for them to find you?
Twitter, which is JG Music. That's currently my favorite social media. But I'm also on Facebook. I think it's Jason Graves Music. And those are exclusive to each other. And I'm on Instagram as JG Music, I believe, as well. And that's also exclusive. So I do different things on different stuff. So if you follow me on all three, it doesn't mean you're getting 3 times the same stuff.
Very cool. Jason, I want to thank you so much again for your time. I know you're a very, very busy man with a lot of projects going on.
And there's always time to talk to super nice people like you and all the folks over here in this chat room. It looks like someone like totally missed out on the whole thing. But
I'm sorry.
Totally my pleasure.
No, thank you. This interview will be on YouTube afterwards, so we'll tweet it out. We'll tweet it to Jason if you're gonna retweet it out. And again, Jason extraordinaire, drummer extraordinaire, future Naughty Dog composer, hopefully.
That's great.
We want to wish you all the best, and thank you so much again.
Oh, thank you very much. Totally my pleasure.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you guys again next week, and again, this will be on YouTube, so stay tuned for that. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys. Take care.
See ya.